Should Gen Z be worried about automation?
Yes, but they should also see it as an opportunity. Now, look, we've always had new technology that automates stuff. And for example, maybe a big debate right now is, should ChatGPT be used in colleges or schools, et cetera? And the funny thing is that when I was in college, the debate was whether or not calculators could be let into class and used for finals. But so we've always found ways to adopt new technology and make sure it's properly used. But that being said, AI really furthers the automation trend, given AI's ability to handle even more complex tasks. And there's a lot of estimates out there about the number of jobs that can be automated. And there's a lot of projections about worker displacement. So, for example, the World Economic Forum estimated that 85 million jobs would be displaced by AI, but 97 million new jobs would be created. And so that's the upside. But the downside is that it's going to be a difficult displacement process for people, which may include lower wages, which may further accelerate some inequality that we have in society. And that actually could be a big issue because whenever you have such societal upheaval, that it could lead to, I don't know, authoritarianism, polarization, et cetera. So I think the point is that Gen Z or any generation, that the individuals should make sure that they're good at something, that
Mm.
they educate and train themselves so they can participate in the digital age, that maybe they can write or train AI, or they become specialized in certain areas. And so I think the main point is be good at something, right? And that was the same message I had for myself, 20 and 30 years ago. And so as long as you excel at something, and are good at it, then I think that you should be okay, as AI continues the automation trend.
And see, that's one of the most dangerous and most intimidating things to think about is AI will continue this automation trend. And so as a Gen Z, how would you recommend they choose that one thing to be good at? Because, obviously, choosing to be good at playing Pokemon is not going to be a pathway to get out of automation. But in the same breath, I think a lot of people would argue that choosing to be good, you know, uh, being a good software engineer would be kind of futile with technologies like ChatGPT getting better and better. So how would you recommend a Gen Z who is cognizant of automation but also hesitant to get started? What would you recommend they get good at or choose to get good at?
Well, it depends on what speaks to them,
Mm.
and what they fundamentally like. You preferably want to be in a situation in which, you enjoy, the chosen path that you want to take or decide to take, and or at least are intellectually stimulated or challenged. And maybe initially, like you may take a job that, like, oh, I don't know about, selling XYZ or whatever, but, take the challenge to get good at selling. And so then therefore that skill set can be portable to other areas that actually may put you in a good situation. I think a lot of people are told, especially younger people are told, it's like, completely follow your heart, blah, 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 blah. And, if I were to follow my heart, I would probably be on a beach somewhere, right? And that's not a way to make a living. I think the message is, find yourself in a position, where you're considered indispensable, and that you're, and then once you get into that position and you get really good at something, and then it opens up additional opportunities for you, and then you can move and then, up the proverbial food chain, et cetera. So I think the message is that, do something that even though you may not love, but something that at least challenges you, or gives you some sort of intellectual stimulation, even though you may not necessarily be completely digging the product or service you're involved with the idea of using that as a stepping stone. And so, maybe play a little three-dimensional chess. It says, look, if I get really good at, selling mobile phones, then that may allow me to get better at selling high-end software that may allow me to really understand the software business, that may allow me to, be a CEO. In the case of my career, I actually, out of college, I was writing marketing material and technical documentation, right? But that didn't, that wasn't going to be my life goal, was to write, user manuals, right? But I leveraged that, and then I got good at something, and I moved into another role, eventually became a CEO of a company, et cetera. So kind of just position yourself for a pathway where you can grow. And then eventually, when you reach that kind of peak, then you can do things that you purely love, after you've kind of, become a master at something.
Uh, Brilliantly said. And, automation is only one of the many detriments of artificial intelligence right now. We hear of autonomous weapons, we hear of deep fakes. And so, in your mind, what are some of the detriments of artificial intelligence that you could speak to, sorry?
Yeah, no problem. So actually, I think one thing, just for your audience and just for not only your audience, but just the broader society, is that, AI has really come to the forefront because of the whole generative AI, chat GPT, where you can type, text, and then it comes out with paragraphs, or you have text to images, et cetera. But historically, really, AI has been focused on automated decision making. And there has been lots of good automated decision making that's been produced. I mean, the AI that's being done in the medical field, to better spot diseases, uh, the AI that car manufacturers are putting in the car with the sensors to make them safer. I mean, there's a lot of practical uses, such as voice recognition, personal assistance, et cetera. So that's all the good stuff. Two of now it turns out, as it relates to AI, that the biggest investors in AI, where they're really heavily investing, are the big tech companies. And it turns out that the two of the largest big tech companies, Meta, formerly Facebook, and Google, at the core are advertising companies. So one of the detriments of AI is the biggest producers of AI are going to use AI to pummel us with more targeted ads, or they're going to try to keep us on their platforms, and in effect, kind of what you mentioned, dark patterns, which is, changing the way that your behavior, and they're going to try to leverage AI, almost like TikTok, just to try to kind of give you that dopamine hit to keep you on, with the auto plays that never stop, and then the increasing explicit nature of each subsequent uh, video that appears. And the problem is, when you start using AI to kind of hook people, that that sometimes people get led into rabbit holes, and it's really bad if you aim the AI at children, because kids, the youngest kids, I mean, we're talking about 10-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, they have few guardrails. So one of the bad things about AI that we're going to see is that we're going to see it to rile people up, and service more ads. You mentioned the kind of the detriment of the dark patterns, so to trick you to not unsubscribing from a service. And in fact, Amazon is being sued in Norway, and just recently was sued by the FTC, because they in effect made it very difficult, and do make it difficult, for people to unsubscribe from Prime. And then, of course, there's other exploitative uses of AI that could be used for discrimination. You mentioned deep fakes as well. And then we've had real instances of deep fake pornography, et cetera. So can be used in an exploitative manner. So the net is that there's a lot of good with AI, but it could be used from an exploitative perspective. You mentioned deep fakes, dark patterns, but also the other thing is, which is a lot harder to spot, is the fact that bias can seep in, and the bias can impact the decisions that are made. such as, if you can get a loan, if you get into a college, et cetera. And so I do think that there should be, some form of regulation for the high risk artificial intelligence that directly impact our, humanity, that there probably does need, just like the FDA, some sort of certification associated with the AI systems to make sure that bias is not being introduced.
Which leads me to my, next set of questions, which is the California Delete Act. We talked about it before, so just give us a brief rundown. What is it?
Sure. So I'm based in California, and I've historically been a tech entrepreneur and CEO. And then over the last few years, I've done a lot of policy work. And one of the areas that has really caught my eye has been the concept of data brokers. And just stepping really far back, companies we directly interface with collect what I call first party data. So if you're dealing with Facebook or Google or Walgreens or Walmart's or the local coffee place, they collect information about you. That's first party data. And if you're in a state or a country that has a privacy law, you can actually contact them and say, "Hey, what information do you have on me, and can you delete my information?" But there's these entities called data brokers that we don't have a direct relationship. So we don't know who they are, and they still collect a lot of information about us, and they collect it from multiple sources. And I'm going to call that third party data. And some of the sensitive data that they collect include our geolocation, which they get from integration with mobile devices. They collect our medical condition from our searches and what websites we visit. They pair that together with loyalty cards and credit card purchase, et cetera. So they create a pretty amazing dossier on us, although a lot of the data is bad, and a lot of advertisement, or a lot of people base their decisions, the companies base their decisions if people get a loan or get insurance, et cetera, based on the data that data brokers have. So the issue is that we don't know who they are, and we really need the ability to say, "Hey, please delete my information because it's my information that you've collected." And unfortunately, if what you need to do is you need to, on a one-on-one basis, go and uh, knock on every one of these guys' doors, if even know who they are, and say, "Please delete my data." They put some, uh, you know, hoops that you have to jump through in front of you, et cetera. And so what I'm proposing with this California Senate bill, Senate Bill 362, which is called the California Delete Act, is that the California Privacy Protection Agency would need to create a website where you go, just like the in the US, the FTC has a do not call registry to block telemarketers. So in this case, you go to this website, you put your name, your email address, your mailing address, hit the go button, and then all the data brokers that are out there that are registered with the state of California have to, every 30 days, look at this database of people that have registered and have to delete the information. So it's basically, it would give consumers here in California a big easy delete button, as opposed to having to go and knock on all these doors. And this is critical because, say, for example, you're a victim of domestic violence. You probably want to hide your address. So that's a great example. Or because people can now track your geolocation, and data brokers will sell that to anyone with a credit card. In the U.S., there's a number of states that have banned abortion, and they collect what places you visited. And if you searched for abortion related topics, you want that data deleted as well to protect your reproductive rights. So there's a lot of examples of consumers, why they would want to have this data deleted from these companies that we don't even do business with directly. And that's what the California Delete Act is all about.
Lex Friedman talks about having a delete button on social media platforms a lot. But I'll ask a purposely stupid question because a lot of Gen Z that I've talked to don't understand the importance of their data. They don't understand why their data is so valuable. They've heard the it's almost overused at this point, but if a product is free, you are the product. Or if it's
Yes.
something that you're using is free, you are the product. So what is the importance of data on the internet? Why should we be worried about our data being out there?
Yeah, and I think there's different things that, first of all, a lot of people are like, well, I haven't done anything wrong, so I have nothing to hide, right? I mean, or okay, that's I understand that that's the trade-off that I have to make to get this service, et cetera. I get the reason and rationale. And in the past, it was solely about serving you ads that kind of followed you around. So you may be in the market to, I don't know, buy a toilet or something like that. And then you're doing some searches, and all of a sudden for the next month, every website you visit has a toilet ad, right? And that's annoying. That's a little creepy, but is that like really scary in terms of a complete violation of your privacy? No, it's a little weird, but okay, I get it, right? Because I typed the word toilet on Facebook or something like that. Well, but the problem is that over the last 6 7 years is that this data that can be used to target you to serve ads is increasingly being weaponized against you. And so there's a lot of examples. So example number one is that this data, because they have such a huge dossier, can be used to actually go after you from an identity theft perspective. If these companies collect information about your email address, your phone number, et cetera, it makes it very easier for you to be phished and to be tricked into giving away or sending money or giving information that could lead to a break into your account. The second thing is that especially for younger kids, that that's at a time period in which you're trying to figure out who you are. You're going through the exploration process. You may not know what your sexuality is. You may not know what your gender is. You don't know who your friends are. You don't know what you want to do in your life. And so obviously online you're going to do a lot of exploration and searching and maybe joining different communities, etc. But I don't think people, as they go through that exploration process, that they want to be in the equivalent of that Big Brother TV show where everything's recorded about you, and that's what's happening. And so now that information is available, that they actually may know that you're gay before your friends or family does, based on what you've done. And I don't think that that's right. We talked about reproductive health, which unfortunately in the US, from my perspective, abortion rights are being limited in a lot of states. And now in a few states, for example, Idaho, it's illegal to help a minor get an abortion out of state. And so now the data that maybe if you were helping a minor to get an abortion in the state of Washington, you did some Google searches, you did a Google Maps, well, that information is now subpoenable, and that could be used against you. We've seen instances of the data being used to manipulate people from a political perspective. We saw that in the 2016 election, where the Russians preyed on people's fears and targeted people with specific messages. And then the final thing is the data can be used to discriminate against you. So if you want to target from an advertising perspective, say young women with young kids, because you want to sell them diapers, you can use that same system to exclude young women with young children from ads for rental properties. Or you can do the same thing with people of certain ethnicities. You can actually make it so that they don't see your ads for an apartment. Or for a loan, et cetera, because and there's a lot of proxies associated with certain demographics based on what music they listen to or what zip code, et cetera, that can be used to discriminate against people. So the stuff that can be used to serve you that toilet ad can be used to exclude you. And so I fundamentally believe that this behavioral advertising ecosystem that we have, I'm not saying ban it. I still believe that we should have obviously, I think it's probably better to have contextual ads based on seeing an ad based on what the website says, but I don't think you should have this data collection happening for kids, nor do I think advertising should be based on the collection of very sensitive data, such as our precise location, our medical condition, our ethnicity, our sexuality, et cetera. So I do think that there should be limitations put forth to reduce the harms that we have. And that's what I talk a lot about in my book, Containing Big Tech, which is that you don't think you're being discriminated against, but maybe you're not seeing the ads for the rental properties that some white 50-year-old person is seeing. And that does happen. And some of the tech companies have been found guilty of facilitating that.
There are two things that I want to say before I ask the next question, but there's a right to be forgotten is one of the main things. Um, and also is that AI systems cannot run without data. It's like you can't have artificial intelligence systems in their current form without loads and loads of data.
Yep,
And so, combining both of these things, do we need a new set of AI rights? And what would these look like?
sure. Well, first of all, depending on where you live, US, Canada, or internationally, et cetera, you may or may not have a set of privacy rights. In the United States, privacy is not in the Constitution, right? And what's been happening is first California, and then now we're up to 12 states have privacy laws that give you the right to know, like what information is being collected about you, and right to say no to the selling and sharing, et cetera. So that's really good. But I want to take into account that there's a lot of people, especially in the US, that don't even have the basic privacy rights. And now we're talking about AI rights. And so what would those AI rights look like? And so to answer your question, yes, we do need a new set of AI rights, but my point is we also first and foremost need privacy rights.
Mhm.
But the AI rights, what it would look like would include the ability to object to automated decision making. So, and that's actually in Europe's privacy law, the GDPR. But I think this is really important, which is increasingly more and more decisions are being made by the system, by the computer, the machine, right? And those decisions have to do with whether or not you can get a credit card, whether or not you can get a loan, whether or not you get into college, whether or not your insurance, et cetera. And there should be a right to have the right to say, look, I object to this decision making. I want some human intervention in this, right? And I think having that for certain life related important events is significant, where purely decision is not just made based on the computer, et cetera. There should be some manual intervention for really important life events. So that's an example of a right. The second type of right that I think that we should have is we probably should have the right to know if we're dealing with AI, right? That there
Mm.
should be the ability to do a star 411 and get the lowdown, get the info if you're talking to something, if you're on a chat bot, to be able to say, is this AI, or am I really talking to Susie on this chat bot? Is this really a computer, or is this really a human, right?
Right.
Similarly, I think that there needs to be some sort of transparency associated with certain images or websites, kind of like a food label,
Mm.
to know if this has been generated by AI, be it text or images or not. And if you kind of look at the evolution of food safety, that we now, when we go to the grocery store, most people don't look at it, right? But there are some people that care, like, oh my God, this has something in it that I'm allergic to, or it has a lot of sugar, or it has a lot of calories, et cetera. So I also think that we need more transparency, and we should have some rights to know what's in stuff, vis-a-vis AI. So those are the type of rights that we need. But I think first and foremost, we need privacy rights.
These are all fascinating topics and such it's such important things to discuss and to start implementing, but it feels like, with all the generative AI hype and uh, all the news and all the billions of dollars being poured into the industry, people to get excited about the narrow prospects of generative AI, but they don't think of the bigger picture. But how did you get into this intersection? Because we're going to be talking about cyber soon. So how did you get into this intersection of AI, privacy, and cyber?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. So I went to the University of Michigan. I grew up in the Midwestern part of the United States in Michigan. And then after college, I moved out to Silicon Valley, started working in some tech companies. And as I said before, I started just writing like marketing documentation, kind of the lowest level. And then I got good at that, and really knew the product. And then I got a job doing some consulting. And then I got into pre-sales. And then I got into product management, and then I became head of marketing at a startup, and then eventually formed my own company. So that was kind of my evolution. And then recently, my last company that I founded it was a cybersecurity company, got acquired, and I'm in a fortunate situation where I now spend part of my time doing what they call angel investing. I invest in other entrepreneurs. And then I've really gotten the bug about, given the fact that I have a strong technology background, that, government and laws, that the people, for the most part are well-meaning, but they don't understand, AI, they don't understand privacy and cybersecurity. So I've been doing a lot of policy advising, including, co-authoring and proposing that California Delete Act that I talked about recently. And then, you know, all this knowledge of being in Silicon Valley, the entrepreneur work, the investing work, the policy work led me to write this book called Containing Big Tech. That what I'm really hoping will do is deliver for readers a clear path forward to rein in online surveillance, AI, and tech monopolies. And I want to be clear that, I'm not a Debbie Downer about technology or the big tech companies. They've done a lot of good things, but just like any large monopolies over time, sometimes they get too big to care, that they start squeezing out other companies, that they have detrimental impacts on society. And what I try to do is try to lay it out in a clear manner for people to understand what the issues are. But I also want to provide solutions. And the book itself, Containing Big Tech, has solutions not only for policymakers in a simple, explanation what can be done, but also for consumers what we can do to better protect ourselves. So there's not as much of this data being collected about us and potentially used against us.
For sure. I think this very simplistic and lazy and irresponsible argument when you start opposing or criticizing big tech or any technology in general that you're being a Luddite is very silly to me. We could go and start criticizing coal 100 years, 200 years ago. It's not that we're Luddites, it's just, we can see downstream now what's happened. Um, so, talking more about your book, Containing Big Tech, what is it about, and can you give us more information on it? And do you have any specific things that you'd like to touch on before it's out?
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to create a simple and comprehensive look at the issues concerning big tech that you could give your Uncle Larry or your average politician and say, and they could read it and say, oh, now I get it, without having to like hand them 500 articles and
Yeah,
et
for
cetera.
sure.
And then the second thing is I did want to provide the solutions out there. And I also think that there's a lot of innovation happening in technology that historically hasn't, people haven't written about it because it's so new. Items like AI, TikTok, there's been some new laws. And these things haven't been covered in past books. So I wanted to give a fresh and up-to-date look at big tech. But one of the things that, we've talked about privacy, we've talked about artificial intelligence. One of the big issues that actually exasperates the problems is the fact that we really have evolved into a situation where we have a significant concentration of power in five companies, the five big tech companies, which are Google, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, and Apple, right? And the problem is when you have such big companies that basically, in their respective markets don't have competition, is that it actually exasperates the problems of their core business models, which is overcollection of our data, and it sets us up for things to, even worse things to happen when you start applying AI to that as well. So I actually believe that, one of the big thrust is that you're not going to solve some of these problems unless you actually solve the antitrust problems. And the interesting thing is that we've had big monopolies in the past. We've had the railroads, we had Standard Oil, we had AT&T. Microsoft, probably your listeners may not recall, but at one point there was this product called Netscape, and that was like, and then Microsoft, said, well, we have our own browser, and you can only use Internet Explorer on the Windows platform, which at the time was the dominant operating system, not like today with iOS and Android, or even Mac OS X. Back then was kind of down in the dumps. And the third-party manufacturers like the Dells, the Compaqs, et cetera, could only put Internet Explorer. Well, the Department of Justice went in and said, no, you can't do this. And Microsoft agreed to allow other internet technologies to be on the dominant platform at the time, which was Windows. And that opened up the door to Google and all these other internet companies, and so it actually took antitrust action. And the other example is, which is actually even before my time, which is AT&T, owned everything from a telecommunications perspective. And AT&T was broken up, and then that caused the whole telecommunications revolution, that it became, then you had companies like MCI and other people offering cheaper international calling. You had real competition. And so what I'm trying to say is that if you actually look to figure out smartly, look at areas where you could potentially break up or rein in these large monopolies, it actually is a net positive thing in terms of innovation, which will then provide more competitive pressure on the companies to rein in the potential misuse of AI and rein in the overcollection of our data that is increasingly becoming weaponized. So I think the one aspect that I think is also kind of unique, which is I tie in how the monopoly positions of these large tech companies actually exasperate the problems that we talked about with privacy and AI.
Sure, sure. And we talked about AI, we talked about privacy, we talked about data privacy and the right to be forgotten. And people don't usually talk about these things, but it's good that we're talking about it now. One
Yeah.
of the things that people usually don't also consider is the cyber front. Very little conversation happens on the impact of a cyber conflict, a cyber war, how to deal with cyber attacks and all of that. And you talk a little bit about that. And so just for this next section, I'd like to discuss the cyber front, if you will. So what would a cyber conflict look like in your opinion?
Well, say for example, uh, like North Korea is a lot of pressures, say even more pressures being put on North Korea, or maybe the US and NATO further step it up in terms of supporting Ukraine, and actually Russia feels that not only it could lose Ukraine, but the whole regime could go down in Russia, that as kind of a way to attack us, that they may go kind of on a cyber war against us. And what that would do is they would attack our infrastructure, the grid, by exploiting vulnerabilities that they've found and that
Right.
they know about. And so the goal would be to shut down dams, shut down the power, and things of that nature, and power plants. And so basically, try to have us go back to the Stone Age, right? And so
Right.
that would be massive. That would be either exploitation of vulnerabilities or massive denial of service attacks on major web services. Obviously, uh, AWS and Google Cloud, AWS coming from Amazon, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure are the big, large cloud platforms, and a lot of companies run their businesses on those, and so maybe those would also be attacked besides the infrastructure, et cetera. And so those are the type of kind of threats that could happen, and it's very conceivable that could be kind of a active desperation if some of these regimes are really in fear of being put out of business.
And people need to realize that it's not that they're attacking the physical space. Like, it's not like a nuclear weapon where it's in the physical realm. It's not like it's a kinetic war that's going on in Ukraine. It starts in cyberspace,
Yeah.
and but it affects everything else, and no communications, even cars don't work, power doesn't work. And so how would we even respond to this type of threat if it does happen? How would we respond to a cyber war? Because once it starts, again, as you were saying, we could get sent back to the Stone Age.
Yeah, I think what we need to do is we need to step up our game from a cybersecurity perspective before we get into a cyber war. And I think there
Right.
needs to be greater awareness of cybersecurity with individuals that for your key accounts, for example, you should have multi-factor authentication on, right? You should not simply rely on a username and password because those can be easily guessed or stolen. And so I think there needs to be better awareness about, with individuals about, phishing attacks, introducing ransomware, et cetera. That's another example of what they could really unleash is just, ransomware for, millions of consumers, just let it rip, right? But I also think that major Western countries need the equivalent of the FAA, right, which is the aviation agency here in the United States, which kind of that agency looks at plane crashes and does a complete diagnostic and provides complete authority when it comes to civil aviation. The problem is in the US, we don't have the equivalent of an FAA for cybersecurity. Yeah, do we have like it's called CISA, which does provide some advice and guidance, but in the US, for example, there's no law that says that people have to report into a central federal organization data breaches. So we track shark attacks, we track the number of pigs, we track hurricanes. We don't actually, at the federal government, track data breaches. And the first thing is if you start tracking the data breaches and having an organization that not only tracks it, but helps organizations resolve it and figures out the latest attack vector and then can share it with government and agencies. So I think we need to do more on that because I think we just need to raise awareness and visibility with people in at a policy level that this is when they're Russia, North Korea, if they get to the point where they're kind of cornered animals, this is the way that they're going to potentially attack us.
100% agree. Just to be respectful of your time, I'll just ask two more questions. More lighthearted questions than what we've been talking about.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
so you're an active angel investor, as you said before, and um, I would strongly recommend some Gen Z look into the startup environment instead of doing post-secondary, but I guess that's another tangent in itself. So let's just say that some Gen Z want to build a startup and want to get funding as soon as possible. In your experience, what should they focus on? What should they look out for? And what are some mistakes that people usually make that they can try to avoid?
Yeah, so if you want to build a company, I think the first thing is that you need to pick a product that solves a real pain point. So make sure your solution is a painkiller, not an aspirin. It's a
Mm.
must have, not a nice to have, that people will be willing to do it. Oftentimes, when I talk to entrepreneurs, they'll have an idea and it's like, well, that's nice, but do people gotta have it, right? Because at the end of the day, that there it needs to solve a compelling business need or scratch an itch with a consumer that they fundamentally have that they feel that it is missing. The second thing is that, so that's the first, like, make sure you've got a real product with a real pain point. The second thing is you preferably want to be in a large market, not only to help you raise money, but gives you room to make mistakes and still succeed. And so don't fool yourself on the market size, be realistic. It's like if you're coming out with a software product, you can't say the entirety of the software market is my market. No, you're going to be in a niche, but make sure that's a niche that could actually become something that's big. And then at the same time, that niche in the market, you want to not have it to be too crowded. And I constantly will have people come to me and say, "Hey, we plan to build a better product than these 4 or 5 other startups." But then when I say, well, wait a minute, but these 4 or 5 other startups in the same market, they've already raised $50 million each, and you're going to be the sixth entrant. And you have some better bells and whistles than they do, but with 50 or $60 million they raise, they can hire a couple engineers and probably build that if they start seeing that they um, are losing deals because if you've introduced those features. So you also want to have a market that you think is large enough, but it's not too crowded. It's kind of the timing aspect. And then I think the final bit of advice is, start with more of a narrow use case, where you're focusing on one specific bowling lane or alley, and that you can be more of a sniper, which allows you to get those initial set of customers and then land and expand from there. And I think oftentimes another problem when people do startups that oh, I have this product, but then they're selling, one of their potential customers is a small business with these needs, and the other one is a large customer with a different set of needs, and you can't solve both. You can't when you're the early stage of a startup, you can't be all things to all people. So you got to be like, hey, this is what we do, this is the target market, so you can have a repeatable model. So those are some of the things that I look for when people come in the door that want to, start a business, et cetera. And I think it fundamentally goes down to, the product. Is it a product that solves a real pain point? Is it in a big enough market but not too crowded? And is it something that you can get initial traction with? And so those are some of the bits of advice that I would have for entrepreneurs.
Great advice. Great advice. And I don't doubt for a second that it's going to help a bunch of Gen Z and maybe a bunch of millennials and even baby boomers who are interested in starting a company. So, last question. This is the Gen Z Diplomat podcast. So, what advice do you have for Gen Z?
My advice is be good at something. Make yourself indispensable, right? And keep up on the changes in technology. Always invest in educating yourself. And so much like I know a lot of Gen Z people or people, irrespective of the generation, want to keep themselves in physical good shape. Well, keep yourself in mental shape as well by keeping up to date on what's happening in technology. Educate yourself, keep yourself fresh. But I think at the end of the day, it kind of goes back to the very first thing I said, is that you're going to get good at something, right? Be good at something, even if it's initially in a job or an area that may not appeal to you. But then if you're good at that, then you can leverage that and then move on, from a career perspective, and that can lead to other things as well. Because um, you know, people don't want to hire mediocre individuals. They want to hire people that are good at something, because if they can be good, the thought process is if they're good at one thing, that it's a higher likelihood that they could be good at another thing, and then you just start building, from there as well. And so I remember when I was young man starting my career, I always thought about James Brown, who was a American soul singer, and he said, he's the hardest working man in show business, right? And I just kind of had that mentality that I was going to, work hard, and be good at something, and then kind of take that and move on, and be thought of as someone that has their proverbial stuff together. And so that's my advice, right? Which is be good.
Fantastic, fantastic. Tom, this has been an incredible conversation. Where can we find you in cyberspace?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. This has been a great conversation. I agree with you on that. So, yeah, I can be reached at my website, tomkemp.ai, where you can learn more about myself. I have a blog where I talk about a lot of the tech issues, but you can also learn about the book containing big tech, and there's some links to order it as well. I'm also on LinkedIn, Tom Kemp. It's pretty easy to find me there. And then finally, I'm also on Twitter, although I think Twitter's kind of a dying platform. I'm at Tom Kemp 00. And so feel free to follow me there as well. And yeah, let's, if anyone has any questions or wants to reach out, feel free to, you can do it through the website.